He screamed when the patrol officer's boot shattered his leg. She didn't. She just stared, unblinking, at the one who did it, like she was memorizing every inch of his face for later. No tears. No flinch. Just a frozen stillness that felt like the air itself was holding its breath. The snow around them was already red. But she hadn't moved. Not yet. They'd landed like they owned the place. Two Galactic patrol officers in silver-etched armor, crunching down through the powdery drifts with scanners drawn and nerves dulled by too many easy stops. The pod wreck had spilled steam and debris across the forest clearing, its back half buried in ice, its emergency beacon long dead. It wasn't supposed to be worth anything. No combat signals, no distress calls, just a low-priority cleanup. That's what they thought until they pried open the hatch and found her crouched over a broken medic with blood frozen to his collar. She looked like a civilian, but something in her eyes was too steady. The first patrolman kept his blaster raised, unsure. The second didn't hesitate. He stormed forward and barked a command she ignored, then repeated it louder with a shove. She shifted just enough to block the medic's body with her own, one hand flat against his chest. The officer saw that as defiance, so he stomped forward and slammed his armored boot down on the medic's leg with a crunch that echoed across the trees. That's when the scream came. The young man, Kir, thrashed once before passing out. She didn't make a sound, just raised her eyes, slow and cold, and locked them onto the patrolman like she was peering through glass at something she'd already decided wasn't human. The other officer said her name, asking if she needed help. She didn't answer. The man who'd broken the leg swore and backed off like she'd punched him without moving. Kir was breathing barely. She didn't move to help. Not yet. The patrol called in the scene. 2 survivors, no threats. No weapons found. Civilian wreckage. Not worth extraction. The orders came through seconds later. Leave them. Take the fuel cells, anything salvageable, then get back in the air. Time-sensitive run to finish. The injured weren't part of the job, so they took what they wanted and left. The one who broke Kir's leg didn't even look back, but the other one lingered at the edge of the clearing. Something about her didn't sit right. The way she hadn't panicked. The way she sat with her back to the wreck, as if she was guarding more than just a person. And under the torn collar of her coat, he glimpsed something that didn't belong on a civilian. A faded tattoo line, geometric and sharp, barely visible, but unmistakable to someone trained to recognize it. He opened his mouth to say something, then stopped. Thought better of it. He turned and left her there with the snow. She waited until the hum of their thrusters disappeared into the wind. Then she moved. Not to Kir. Not yet. She crawled back toward the broken side of the pod and jammed her frozen fingers into a collapsed panel. It resisted. She bared her teeth and yanked harder until the corner peeled back and a hiss of cold vapor escaped. Inside was a secured compartment, sealed with biometric authorization. Her thumb pressed against the pad, and the case inside released with a gentle click. Inside was a matte black data chip and a narrow weapons case with a mechanical lock. She didn't open them. Not yet. She tucked both under her arm and staggered back to the small dent in the snow, where Kir lay breathing shallowly. His skin was pale, eyes fluttering behind shut lids. She bent down, not with affection, but with precision, checked his pulse, tilted his chin. Then, finally, she placed a pressure pack on his leg and activated the medfoam dispenser. Kir groaned. His eyelids twitched. She whispered to him in a language the patrol wouldn't have recognized. Something soft and clipped, too smooth for any outer-world dialect. His face calmed. She pressed a hand against his chest and waited as the autofoam hardened over the fracture. Then she stood up, turned toward the trees, and listened. The patrol had left, but they hadn't disappeared. Their trail was a map written in crushed snow and thermal residue. She studied it with an intensity that felt ritualistic. Then she glanced down at the data chip in her palm. Just before sliding it into the field HUD from her coat lining, she paused. Her breath curled visibly into the cold. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was barely a whisper. They hurt him to get to me. The HUD activated. Code scrolled fast across the lens, then cleared to show video footage. The patrol, recorded hours earlier. Their briefing: capture or confirm target status. Do not engage unless provoked. Priority bounty. Confirm identity via visual scan. Name: Vessa. She shut the HUD off and slid the chip back into her collar. Her name was supposed to be erased from every registry. Deleted 3 years ago, with a forged shuttle incineration and a falsified DNA match. She had spent months living in the ice worlds, moving only by barter, keeping low. KIR had found her by accident and insisted on helping her after she'd collapsed from exposure. She hadn't told him anything, and now he was broken because of her. That was going to change. She sealed the weapons case and strapped it to her back. The snow around her glistened with the last light of a dying sun. She didn't look back at the wreck again, only whispered one word as she stepped into the trees, following the trail the patrol had left like it was a bloodline. Run. The forest grew darker as Vessa moved, the snow thickening in the narrowing paths between crooked trees. It wasn't cold to her anymore. Not really. Her breath still steamed in the air, but her mind was elsewhere, sifting through protocols, suppressing memories, calculating angles. The patrol thought they'd left a ghost behind. They didn't realize that's exactly what she used to be. Vessa, classified operative, Recon Ghost Unit 9. Buried in redacted files and forgotten battles. Her name wasn't supposed to echo anymore. But now it did, quietly carried in the electronic whispers of bounty circuits. Someone had flagged her existence. That meant they wanted her dead. Or worse, captured alive. Her boots made no sound as she passed beneath a broken pine. Above, a thin veil of cloud let through pale, blue light. The patrol's trail wasn't hard to follow. They moved like men who didn't believe they could be followed. Their prints dragged lazily through the snow, occasionally breaking into short dashes where one of them must have stumbled or joked too hard. She saw where a ration wrapper was dropped, still fresh. They were arrogant. That would cost them. When the HUD flickered again, she brought it to life and inserted the chip one more time. This time, she paused the scrolling data halfway through. An encrypted feed appeared. A command node. She hesitated, thumb hovering over the initiate key. The message it would send was one she had buried, one that could reignite parts of her past that were better left in the dark. She didn't press it. Not yet. Instead, she accessed the last recording again. There was the captain, tall and square-jawed, briefing his men in a transport bay. There was no malice in his voice, just obedience. She froze the screen and zoomed in on his badge. Regional designation. Off-grid. Blacklist jurisdiction. That explained their freedom to act without oversight. It also meant no one would come looking for them. Good. She wasn't planning on leaving any of them behind. She reached the edge of a frozen ravine and crouched. On the other side, less than 200 meters away, was the camp. Makeshift, temporary. 3 thermal tents arranged in a loose triangle, one power core buzzing too loudly for proper concealment, and a comms antenna stabbed halfway into the ice. They hadn't even scanned for resonance pulses. It was pathetic. She counted 4 figures moving, one limping, one tending the antenna. The others were inside the tent, probably resting. That meant her window was small. She slid the weapon case from her back and unlocked it with a palm scan. The lid rose silently, revealing what no one should have seen again. A compact rail dagger, foldable plasma filament wire, and a folded silkskin sheath lined with microtools. She didn't reach for the blade. Not yet. She took the sheath and wrapped it around her wrist. Then she slipped away from the ridge and began to circle left, keeping low, using the tree line as cover. As she moved, she heard their laughter. The patrol had music playing through one of the tent interfaces, tinny, distorted, but loud enough to make her grind her teeth. The sound of men who thought the worst was over. One joked about the medic. She didn't catch the whole line, but she heard enough to know they didn't regret what they'd done. The man who'd crushed KIR's leg was bragging about the sound it made. That was the last voice she was going to hear before the clearing went quiet. She crept to the nearest tent, drawing the rail dagger but keeping it folded. No metal, no shine. Only silent options. At the base of the antenna, she jammed one of her microtools into the resonance core and disrupted its balance. It would overload in 60 seconds. Enough time to disappear. She moved toward the power cell next, slicing one cord with surgical precision so the lights in the far tent would flicker in 5 minutes. Not now. Staggered confusion was always better than one clean panic. She retreated back into the shadows, just as the antenna began to hum louder. The patrolman tending it cursed. She watched him tap the console twice, then again with more force. The signal spiked. Then a spark shot through the wiring, and the entire rig exploded in a flash of purple static. Not deadly, but blinding. The man screamed and fell back, eyes shut and clutching his face. Another came running. As he knelt to help, Vessa was already behind him. She didn't kill him. Not yet. She wrapped the filament wire around his throat and pressed until he passed out. Then she dragged him silently into the shadows, bound him, and left him with a note scrawled in blood on his armor plate. One word. Mistake. The others didn't know yet. She saw one emerge from the tent, weapon raised, shouting orders. The one who broke KIR's leg wasn't among them. She followed the shout back to the central tent and waited until the leader stormed inside. That was her chance. She darted between two trees and reached the tent flap just as it began to close. Her foot caught it. She slipped inside before it sealed. He was facing the heater, bent over a map. She moved fast, wrapping the wire around his throat and slamming his head into the control panel. He fought back hard, swinging backward, elbowing her ribs. She didn't flinch, just twisted harder until he dropped to his knees. When he blacked out, she lowered him gently to the floor. Then she took his comms pad and his access card. She didn't look at his face. Not yet. She had time for that later. Outside, someone called his name. She grabbed a flask from his belt and splashed it on her jacket. Then she ran out of the tent, deliberately stumbling, gasping, pretending panic. The patrolman ran toward her. That was the moment she wanted. He grabbed her shoulders trying to speak, but before he could, she jammed the rail dagger into the gap beneath his collar. He dropped without sound. She looked down at his face. It was the one who laughed about Kerr, the one who broke his leg. She didn't speak. She didn't smile. She just turned and disappeared back into the dark. The sun didn't rise the next morning. Not in the forest where the patrol had set camp. It only smeared gray light through the tree branches, the kind that made the world look like an old photograph, half-burned. Vessa was already awake, crouched behind a ridge where the snow drifted high enough to shield her scent from the wind. She'd watched all night, listened, counted. The camp was broken. 2 men were dead, 1 missing, 1 unconscious, and tied to a tree. That left 2. The captain, who hadn't shown his face again since the tent incident, and the last patrolman who now looked over his shoulder every 5 seconds. Their routine had crumbled. They moved differently. Paranoid, jumpy, but still too loud. Still not good enough. She hadn't killed them all on purpose. Not yet. Fear, she'd learned, was more useful than corpses. A corpse didn't whisper warnings. It didn't make mistakes in panic. But men who feared death made noise. They talked to themselves, stumbled, ignored protocol. They became animals and tried to run. That was when they were easiest to hunt. She followed from a distance now. The younger of the 2 survivors had taken to wandering the forest edge with a blaster drawn and barely any discipline left in his movements. He muttered to the wind, thinking he heard breathing, thinking he saw things. Once he fired into the trees. He was unraveling. That was the beginning of his end. She let him walk further from camp each hour, just enough. Each time he ventured too close to the ridge, she marked the trees behind him with silent cuts in the bark. Soon he'd follow his own trail in circles without realizing. Then she would end it. But the captain was different. He stayed inside the central tent, now reinforced with 2 perimeter alarms and a personal motion scanner. She had seen him peering through a narrow slit in the tent wall, helmet off, face drawn tight with something more than fear. Recognition. He knew who she was now. That much was clear. He had accessed the bounty file again, probably watched the same footage she did. Maybe even older ones. Combat footage from a war buried so deep in red tape that only senior clearance allowed access. He had connected the dots. The wrecked pod. The silence. The precision of the attacks. The way none of his men came back. He'd realized this wasn't revenge from a grieving survivor. This was the return of something his generation had been warned about but never expected to meet. By midday, the younger man finally snapped. He packed a rations bag, refilled the water unit, and started to walk. Not fast, but steady. Vessa let him get just far enough. She waited until the snow swallowed the tent light behind him, then moved. She didn't kill him outright. Instead, she set one of his traps off ahead of him, a noise-triggered smoke pellet designed to mimic footsteps. He ran toward it and stopped when he found nothing. Then she whistled once from the trees, just a short note like a bird. He turned, wide-eyed, spinning around and firing blind. She waited for his panic to crest, then stepped out with her blade already extended. He didn't fight. He just dropped the weapon and screamed. It echoed back to the tent, but by the time the captain scrambled outside, there was no sound. Only trees. Only wind. The captain called out. He even pleaded, his voice cracking under the weight of desperation. She didn't answer, but she left something in the man's place. His communicator cracked and bloodied, resting on a stump with another note written in burned ink. Stop looking. It wasn't a threat. It was a warning. But it was too late for warnings. She circled back around camp that night and climbed a tree that overlooked the clearing. There she waited as the captain made one final call. It wasn't to his superiors. It was to an off-grid frequency buried in the patrol's Black Channel Index. He begged for extraction, breaking standard code, requesting emergency pickup without flagging the reason. He said only one word before ending the transmission. Ghost. Vessa leaned back against the cold trunk and breathed slowly. That word had weight. That word would bring more hunters. But not yet. Not tonight. Later that evening, when the captain was alone again in the tent, she approached. Not with silence this time, but with sound. She deliberately snapped a branch underfoot and stepped into view across the fireless clearing. He looked up and froze. Her blade wasn't drawn. Her arms were empty. She stopped 10 feet from the edge of the light and waited. He didn't reach for a weapon. He didn't move. She asked him why. Why had they hit her pod? Why had they targeted a downed shuttle with no threat signals? Why did they go for the medic first? His voice trembled when he answered. He said he didn't know it was her. Said the orders came from above. Anomalous signal. Wreck on restricted transport route. Orders said neutralize and scan. That was all. She asked him why KIR had to suffer for that. He didn't answer. She stepped forward once. He didn't retreat. He just stared. Then he said something strange. He said he'd read her file. He said he knew she wasn't supposed to be alive, that her whole unit had vanished off record. He asked if she remembered a place called Varelian Hollow. Her silence confirmed it. He told her his brother had died there. Same war. Different side. She didn't flinch. Then he did something even stranger. He knelt. Not in surrender, not in prayer. Just sank to the ground and placed his blaster on the snow. Said if she had to do it, he wouldn't stop her. But he asked her to leave his name off whatever came next. Not for his sake. For his daughter's. Said she thought he was a technician. Not a soldier. Not a killer. Vessa watched him for a long time. Then she picked up the blaster, checked it, unloaded it, and tossed it aside. She walked away. She didn't speak again. And the captain didn't follow. The cold had become sharper by the time Vessa reached the upland tower. The trees had thinned into brittle stalks coated in frost, and the wind carried no warmth, only a sharp whistle that cut across her ears as she climbed the ridge. The tower loomed like a jagged finger stabbing upward from the snowfield. It was old, half-buried, patched with emergency scrap from half a dozen supply drops, and poorly shielded. She could hear the hum of its core long before she saw it. That hum meant someone had activated it. Someone was calling for help. It wasn't KIR. The ridge overlooked the clearing where the last patrol beacon stood. The makeshift relay dish glowed faintly at the base, lit by blue power lines that pulsed like veins in the ice. The captain was there, alone. His helmet was off again, hung lazily from his belt. His eyes were bloodshot, sunken. A portable transmitter blinked beside him, antenna tilted to the stars. He was talking softly to it, but she couldn't hear the words. Not from this far. He wasn't armed, at least not visibly. He had that air of someone who had already lost everything and just wanted someone to acknowledge it. Vessa watched in silence, letting the wind carry her breath away. She should have felt something. Anger, satisfaction, closure. But there was only a stillness in her chest, the kind that came after a war, but before the reckoning. She crept down the ridge in a slow spiral, circling wide through the tree line, her boots barely disturbing the frost. He didn't notice her until she was within 20 feet. He looked up then, eyes meeting hers with no surprise. As if he knew she'd come. He didn't move, just sat back on a metal crate and exhaled. He said he'd finished the transmission. Said someone would be here within the hour. Not more patrol. Not reinforcements. High command. Extraction unit. Heavy escort. Not for him. For her. The name had gone up the chain. Vessa. The ghost. The name that wasn't supposed to exist anymore. He told her he'd sealed the message with his own clearance. Told them the truth. That it was her. That she was alive. That she was dangerous. That she needed to be recovered or erased. He said it calmly. Not like a threat. Like a man reporting weather. She asked him why. He didn't blink. Said he was tired of war stories. Said ghosts weren't meant to haunt the living forever. Said the galaxy needed to know she still existed. Not to hunt her, but to remember. She moved forward, slowly, hands empty. The snow crunched under her feet. She stopped just outside his reach. He didn't flinch, just looked up at her like a man who had already made peace with his death. She didn't strike. Instead, she asked him about Kir. He said the boy was unlucky. Wrong place, wrong time. Said he hadn't meant to harm him, but there was no regret in his tone. Only weariness. She asked if he would take it back. He said no. That you didn't take back things in war. You buried them or you bled for them. And he was too tired to bleed. Vessa didn't reply. She just turned and walked to the relay dish. Her fingers danced across the transmitter pad, bypassing the encryption he'd set. Within seconds, she saw the call logs. The alert signal was still active. The ship would arrive soon. She couldn't stop it. Not unless she destroyed the tower. And she could. She looked at the core. The exposed lines. The unstable power relay. One overload and the entire node would short-circuit. It would never relay a second signal again. But if she did that, others would come anyway. Later. With more force. Because a destroyed node meant someone was hiding something. She stood there for a long moment, snow collecting on her shoulders. Then she pulled out a signal disruptor from her belt and pressed it to the control panel. She didn't destroy the signal. She corrupted it, modified it, twisted the signature just enough to misidentify the source. The call still stood, but the name didn't. The record would show a false distress from a scavenger vessel. Non-combatants. She severed the locator tag and walked away. The captain hadn't moved. She told him what she'd done. He nodded once, slowly. Said it wouldn't last. That someone would still piece it together. That people didn't stay hidden forever. She told him that was fine. As long as Kir didn't end up in a coffin because someone saw her face. He asked her what she planned to do now. She said she didn't know. She asked if he would shoot her in the back if she turned around. He said no. Then she asked him if he wanted her to end it for him. There was a long silence. Then he said he already ended it, and pulled a thin injector from his sleeve, pressed it to his neck. Vessa didn't stop him. He collapsed with a whisper, the snow catching him softly. She stood over his body for a moment and looked toward the sky. The clouds were breaking. A ship would come eventually. But it wouldn't find a war zone. It wouldn't find a ghost. Just a broken beacon and an empty camp. She left him there and vanished into the forest. The wind took her footprints. The snow swallowed the evidence. And the patrol was gone. The wind had shifted direction by the time she made it back to the pod. Snow had half covered the wreckage, muting the metallic glint of the torn panels and frozen cabling. The clearing was quieter now, like even the trees were holding their breath. Vessa stepped around the debris with silent familiarity, her eyes scanning for movement, for footprints that didn't match hers. There were none. The forest had stayed asleep while she was gone. That was good. That meant she still had time. Kir was still inside, curled in the same place where she had left him, swaddled in thermal wraps, his legs stabilized with foam and a rig brace made from scavenged struts. His breathing was steady but shallow, the kind of rhythm that spoke of pain being held at bay by sheer willpower and whatever painkillers she'd managed to inject into his system. His eyelids fluttered as she approached, and his voice was a low, confused rasp. He asked if she was real. She didn't answer. She crouched beside him and checked the seal on his brace, then the pressure on his oxygen valve. When she finally looked at his face, his gaze was clearer than she expected. He knew something had changed. He always saw more than he was supposed to. Even before the crash, she'd noticed that about him. He asked what had happened. She said the patrol was gone. He asked if they were dead. She said they wouldn't be a problem anymore. He went quiet for a long time after that. She unpacked the stolen medkit and opened a fresh gauze pack. As she wrapped his arm, he watched her in silence, only breaking it once to ask a question she had expected and hoped he wouldn't ask. He wanted to know who she really was. She paused for only a second before answering. She told him her name, her full name, Vessa. She said it without flinching, like letting it back into the world had no power over her anymore. She told him what she used to be, not the details, not the number of kills or the missions or the orders that were never written down, just the truth, that she used to be a part of something meant to end threats before they ever took shape, that she had disappeared to avoid becoming one herself, that the only reason she'd survived this long was because no one knew where to look. Until now. Kir didn't speak for a while. Then he surprised her. He said he already knew she wasn't just a technician. Said he'd seen how she moved even before the crash. Said no one just walked like that unless they were trained not to leave shadows. Said he knew when someone had seen death and walked away from it more than once. But he hadn't said anything because he figured everyone was running from something. She stared at him for a moment and didn't smile. But something softened around her eyes. They sat like that for a while, listening to the quiet, to the subtle creaks of the forest around them settling under the weight of new snow. Eventually, she stood and walked to the back of the pod where the emergency flare was still intact, buried beneath a crushed NAV panel. She pried it loose, calibrated the signal to Alliance frequency, and waited. There was no dramatic countdown, no flashing beacon. Just a soft whine and a gentle pulse of green that blinked up toward the clouds. Kir asked her if that was wise. She said probably not. He laughed, and the sound was thin but real. She told him the patrol's report had been changed, that the signal log now listed the incident as a scavenger conflict, that the data trail wouldn't point to them, not immediately, and not accurately. She told him they'd have to move when the recovery team came, that they'd be safer if they split up afterward. He said he wasn't going to leave her alone in the snow again. She looked at him and said she was never alone. Not in the ways that mattered. He didn't argue after that. Hours passed. The sky dimmed. Then the hum began. At first it was distant, buried under the wind. Then louder. The sound of an Alliance transport piercing through orbit with slow precision. Vessa stood outside the pod, coat drawn tight, snow drifting around her boots, as the sleek gray craft descended through the trees. It touched down with a soft thump, the snow kicking up around its thrusters in swirling gusts. Two figures emerged. Not soldiers, not enforcers. Medics in white and green, armed only with scanners and stretcher bots. One of them saw her and paused. His scanner flickered once before he turned it off without a word. She handed him KIR's chart, along with a data stick of medical logs, injuries, treatment protocols. She said nothing else. Neither did he. They lifted KIR gently, securing him to a padded gurney and stabilizing his vitals with soft clicks and quiet commands. KIR didn't ask questions. He only looked at her once as they loaded him into the craft. She nodded. He nodded back. Then he was gone. She didn't board the ship. One of the medics turned to her, said she'd freeze if she stayed out here. She told him she liked the cold. He asked if she needed extraction. She shook her head. He said the logs showed 2 survivors. She said they were wrong. He opened his mouth like he wanted to say more, then closed it and stepped back inside. The ship lifted without another word. She watched it disappear into the clouds. The wind picked up again. She turned away from the clearing and vanished into the forest. Behind her, the snow began to fall. Not heavy, just enough to erase the footprints. Just enough to bury the last pieces of a story that would never be told the way it truly happened. And the ghost disappeared once more.